In the early 1990s, fewer than 30 wild panthers remained in the swamps of southern Florida. 80% of males were born without testicles. Hearts had defects. Sperm was nearly non-viable. The species was dying not from hunters, but from its own blood. Then biologists proposed a genetic gamble. Rather than protecting the purity of the subspecies, they would crossbreed the dying panthers with cougars from another state. 8 Texas females were brought to Florida, and what happened next was not predicted by any plan. 10 years earlier, in the early 1980s, veterinarian Melody Rolke had begun systematically examining the Florida Panther population. What she found had no external explanation. Tails were bent at a right angle. They were not injured. They were simply that way in 90% of individuals. On the back, a whorl of fur grew against the rest in 94% of the population. In healthy cougar populations, it occurred in 9%. 80% of males born between 1990 and 1992 were without testicles, or had only one. Females had hearts with holes between the chambers. Sperm quality was abysmal, in her own words in an NPR interview. Rolke sent samples to Stephen O'Brien, a geneticist at the National Cancer Institute in Maryland. The answer was unambiguous. The Florida Panther had less genetic diversity than any large mammal population ever studied. Of the 30 individuals remaining, only 6 females were producing offspring. Their kittens died young, were born with defects, or turned out to be sterile. Rolke reported this for years, but colleagues refused to believe it. She later said in an NPR interview that it was so devastating she decided to leave for Africa because she felt the battle was lost. The system finally began to listen, but without her. In October 1992, geneticists, biologists, and representatives of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, and state agencies gathered in a conference room at White Oak Plantation Conservation Center in northern Florida. They were looking at the same data Rolke had been collecting for years. The verdict, 95% probability of extinction within 20 years. But even after the numbers were on the table, there was no consensus. The fear was specific. Texas Cougars and Florida Panthers were different subspecies. Introducing outside genes meant risking the erasure of the Florida Panther as a distinct subspecies. Saving it, but replacing it with something else. Stuart Pym, an ecologist from Duke University, would later say he had held this position himself. You are treating the symptom, not the cause. Many of his colleagues agreed. The debate lasted 3 years. Texas was not chosen by accident. Historically, Florida Panthers and Texas Cougars had interbred naturally through Louisiana before humans severed their range in the 19th century. Texas Cougars were not foreign blood. They were the same genetic stream that nature had once maintained on its own. The task was framed simply: restore what humans had interrupted. In January 1995, federal agencies called Roy McBride. McBride was born in 1936 in the mountains of West Texas. The nearest town was 100 miles away on mountain roads. He grew up in country where mountain lions were enemies, and their elimination was work and pride. Journalist Donald Schuler wrote of him in a 1991 book. In his younger years, he did more to bring the mountain lion to the brink of extinction in Texas than any other individual. That is not a metaphor. It is documented fact. McBride had spent decades hunting cougars for government money and for private orders from ranchers. In 1972, the World Wildlife Fund hired him for a different purpose, to confirm whether the Florida Panther still existed at all. He confirmed it, yes, it did, near Lake Okeechobee. The same man who had nearly eliminated the species in the West was the first to confirm it was still alive in the East. Journalist Craig Pittman, who wrote a book about this story, described McBride's face in a single sentence. It looked like it had been carved from stone. In January 1995, he flew to Texas. In the mountains, he worked with a blinded mule. Not from caprice, from calculation. A mule that can see a lioness lies down and refuses to move. A blinded one goes where it is led. McBride flushed cats from rocks and caves, driving them where he could make a shot. He caught between 15 and 20 animals. Most he released. Males were not needed. Old ones were unsuitable. Those that looked insufficiently healthy went back into the mountains. The man who had spent his entire life killing lions now stood over an anesthetized cat and decided, this one qualifies, or it does not. When he found a suitable female, he used a ketamine tranquilizer. Then he put the sedated lioness onto the mule's back, the mule to the truck, and the lioness into the passenger seat beside him at the wheel. Not in the bed, right beside him. Ketamine does not always hold for the full journey. If the cat woke up in the back, she would jump out and vanish. In the cab, McBride could see every movement. He drove home with a lioness in the passenger seat and a mule on a lead behind. Then cages he had built himself, quarantine and disease testing followed. 6 cats were shipped on commercial flights to an area near Naples. 2 went to the Everglades. No one announced it on the radio. The Texas lionesses were not the first attempt. In October 1992, at the White Oak meeting, the same one where scientists had examined Rulke's data, 4 options were on the table. First, a captive breeding program. Second, crossbreeding with zoo cats that supposedly carried pure Florida blood. Third, bringing in Texas Cougars. Fourth, doing nothing. They had already tried the first option and it had failed. Kittens with the best genetic profiles had been caught and placed in a captive breeding program, but the same defects destroying the wild population were transmitted in captivity as well. Kittens were born identical. The program was reproducing the problem rather than solving it. The second option, zoo cats, also fell away. Their origins were too unclear. Nobody could confirm these were truly Florida Panthers and not hybrids from Central America. That left the third option, the one most people considered a bad idea. Texas was chosen not because it was a good plan. Texas was chosen because everything else had already failed. All 8 Texas females arrived in Florida in the spring and summer of 1995. Each was released in pairs in different parts of the state's south: the Everglades, Big Cypress, Fakahatchee Strand. Each wore a radio collar. Each was to be tracked by aircraft. The first, TX-104, a 4-year-old female in her prime, was supposed to spend a week in an acclimation cage at Fakahatchee Strand Preserve. The day after arrival, the cage was opened to provide water. She was out in a second and gone into the swamp. The biologists did not panic. The radio collar was in place. They could find her, but the acclimation could not be recovered. 3 of the 8 died before they could accomplish anything. 1 was struck by a vehicle on the highway. 1 was shot. When she was found, she was pregnant. The genetic material that no longer existed anywhere in the wild disappeared with her and with the kittens that would never be born. 1 shot and an entire branch of the future was severed. The third died under what official documents describe as somewhat murky circumstances. 5 remained. 5 cats from another state in foreign swamps among dying males they had never encountered. The entire experiment rested on 5 animals. For 7 months, biologists flew daily and checked coordinates from the air. Where were the cats? Were they approaching the males? Nobody knew whether the Texas lionesses and Florida males would even want to mate. Texas Cougars had grown up in mountains and arid plains. Florida males lived in swamps. Different scent, different behavior, different worlds, and there were almost no males left. Those that remained had negligible sperm counts. Nobody knew if even the few capable of reproduction would be sufficient. Then in October 1995, 7 months after the first release, one of the Texas females gave birth to 2 kittens, a male and a female. No whirl, no kinked tail, no heart murmur. Pittman described the team's reaction in one word: miracle. But there was another challenge. While the first kittens were taking their first steps in the swamps, lawyers were resolving a question nobody had anticipated. If the hybrids were technically no longer pure Florida Panthers, did they fall under the protection of the Endangered Species Act? Could a farmer shoot a hybrid cat and claim it was not a Florida Panther? The Fish and Wildlife Service responded officially, but only a year after the operation began. In February 1996, the agency published in the Federal Register a ruling. Hybrids were to be considered Florida Panthers and fell under full federal protection. The ruling was applied retroactively. While it did not exist, the legal protection for the new generation was an empty document. The pregnant female shot in 1995 died during exactly that interval. 5 Texas females produced the first 15 kittens. By 2000, not one offspring of the first or second generation had been born with the characteristic right-angle tail kink. Not one. From 88% of the population displaying this defect in 1990 to 0 among hybrids within 10 years. But then something began that no plan had anticipated. The hybrid offspring behaved radically differently. Stephen O'Brien and his team measured animal fitness in various ways. One indicator was behavior during capture. Florida Panthers, when treed, froze. They waited for the researchers. Hybrids jumped, directly over the heads of the researchers, twice as frequently as purebred Floridians. O'Brien called them the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Cougars in a comment to National Geographic in 2010. According to a 30-year study published in Science in 2010, of 29 purebred Florida Panthers older than 1 year, 23 died from 2002 to 2004. Of 47 hybrids over the same period, only 22 died. Kitten survival was 21% in purebreds. It was 53% in hybrids. Genetic diversity rose from 16 to 24% by heterozygosity measure. Virtually every measure showed that the admixed animals did better, O'Brien said. By 2003, both of the last living Texas females had been captured and removed. They had done their work. Their legacy was already spreading through new generations. In 2007, the population crossed 100 individuals for the first time in modern documentation. In 2017, a female Florida Panther was documented with kittens north of the Caloosahatchee River. For the first time in more than 40 years. The species had not simply survived, it had started moving north. While scientists were recording percentages in heterozygosity, TX104 was living alone in the Everglades. 3 years. The radio collar was on. Biologists knew where she was, but she did not mate with any male the team was tracking. She did not acclimate and did not become part of the data. Whether she left offspring is still unknown. If she did mate, it was with some animal nobody was tracking. No confirmed progeny appears in the databases. In 1998, she was found shot. Who and why are still unknown. The case was never solved. A pure Texas mountain lioness in foreign swamps, she lived there 3 years on her own terms, and left as inexplicably as she had arrived. The genetic rescue worked so well that it created a new problem. A population that had spent decades hiding in the most remote swamps of the South began expanding north. Kittens followed their mothers. Young males sought new territories, and there, on the roads, waited danger. In 2024, 36 panther deaths, the highest since 2016. The primary cause was vehicles. In 2025, 17 of 18 documented deaths were from vehicle strikes. The further north they went, the denser the development. The more highways, the less space in which to move undetected. But roads are not the only new danger that expansion brought. When the population was small, panthers rarely encountered each other. Now they do constantly, and on limited territory without sufficient prey, this means one thing: fights to the death. After vehicle strikes, intraspecific aggression is the second most frequent cause of Florida panther mortality. Males defend territories. When boundaries compress, conflicts become lethal. In 2025, one of the first 5 documented deaths of the year was exactly this: a panther killed by another panther in Hendry County. This is not a behavioral anomaly, it is mathematics. More healthy animals on less territory with less food, and they begin killing each other. The 1995 genetic rescue solved the diversity problem. It could not solve the space problem. In April 2026, a lawsuit was filed in federal district court in Fort Myers. The South Florida Wildlands Association, the Sierra Club, and the Center for Biological Diversity challenged the decision to develop rural lands west, 10,264 acres of residential and commercial real estate in Collier County, right in the heart of critical panther habitat. By Conservancy of Southwest Florida estimates, 5 large projects and a mine in Lee and Collier counties together will generate more than 260,000 vehicle trips daily through areas where panthers still live. Matthew Schwartz of the South Florida Wildlands Association said, "The town of Big Cypress could add roughly 18,000 new vehicles into the habitat." Jason Totoyu of the Center for Biological Diversity said, "What is happening is death by 1,000 cuts. Over 20 years, the population has lost more than 30,000 acres of habitat. Today, fewer than 200 adults remain in the wild, and their numbers are declining." Then in July 2025, a study by UCLA and UC Berkeley and PNAS added another layer of concern. Genomic analysis confirmed that Texas genes had not displaced Florida ones. Modern panthers retain 59 to 80% of the original Florida genetic heritage. But along with the beneficial genes came harmful mutations. Nearly half the deleterious mutations in modern Florida panthers are of external origin. For now, they are masked by genetic diversity. But if the population remains small, the masking will disappear. Another transplant may be needed. The same experiment again. From 1981 to 2021, scientists captured and examined 1,192 Florida panthers. 9 generations, 40 years of data. The conclusion was unambiguous. For the first time in the history of science, it had been proven that the benefits of genetic rescue persist beyond 5 generations in a terrestrial vertebrate. In April 1993, a Miami hockey club announced its name, the Florida Panthers, named after a dying subspecies that most Americans had never seen in the wild. In 2024 and 2025, that team won the Stanley Cup 2 years in a row. An animal with fewer than 200 individuals in the wild gave its name to the most successful hockey team in the NHL. Today, this rescue is taught as a textbook example around the world. But one of the authors of the UCLA study said something that is rarely heard in official statements. Florida got a little lucky. The Texas genes didn't bring stronger deleterious mutations. That's why the rescue worked.